we'll get started, and others can join in as we go along. So, welcome everybody. I'm Paula Quigley, the chair of the board of the International Stillbirth Alliance. This is our bi-monthly ISI Presents. So when one of our members presents their work or an idea or a project, and we are delighted today to have Sophie Meunier, and I hope I'm saying that right, Sophie, um, joining us. And Sophie is going to talk about the experience of women going back to work after perinatal loss. So I'm sure this topic will resonate with many of you, either from your own personal experience or from your organizational or research experience. So we're really looking forward to hearing what Sophie has to say. And then there'll be about a 25-30 minute presentation, and then we will open up for questions and answers. So if you don't mind holding your questions, you can put them into the chat as we go along, or hold them to the end, and then we really would love to open up the dialogue to everyone, and we can have a conversation. But do feel free to use the chat in the meantime, and do feel free to introduce yourself as well. Without further ado, Sophie, I will hand over to you if you'd like to give us a little bit more about your background and what you're going to speak about. Thank you.
Yes, perfect. So I think I'm going just to share my screen right now, just to make sure everything is all right. So you should
perfectly
be
working,
seeing
yes.
the presentation. All right, perfect. So yes, so I work in organizational psychologist. So maybe that's the link with the topic of the presentation, focusing on the workplace. But I'm also professor at University of Quebec in Montreal. So it's still quite early, but not that early, but still morning. I'm still on morning coffee. This morning is 9 o'clock for me, but I don't know. I think there's people from every time zone. So good afternoon, good evening, if it's more your case. So my research interests focus on psychological health of different types of workers, including those who experience perinatal loss. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to talk about more precisely a research project that was inspired several years ago by my colleague Francine de Montigny. Maybe some of you know her for her extensive work on perinatal loss and her involvement in International Stillbirth Alliance. So Francine, she noticed in her studies that many parents seems to face significant challenges when returning to work following their loss. As with my background as an organizational psychologist, I looked into it and I realized that there were very, very few studies focusing precisely on this subject, as if work and perinatal loss were two worlds that never connected. And we know that it's quite impossible to perfectly separate our personal life from our professional life. So I just then decided to carry out a study to better document what happens when, in fact, these two worlds collide. And here today are some results about this research project. But before digging in our findings, some background information. First, it's important to know that in our research project, we define perinatal loss as the loss of a baby during pregnancy, childbirth, or within the first 28 days of life. We know that it is a frequent event affecting at least 1 in 5 pregnancies in Western countries, but it remains taboo, rarely discussed in the public sphere, and even less so in the workplace. We also know that it has harmful effects on the physical and psychological health of parents, which can last for several months or even years. Although the period of leave following the loss is variable, parents usually return to work quite quickly while still experiencing high levels of grief, which we presume would bring significant disruption in their functioning at work. However, this has never been scientifically documented in a large-scale study. So to fill this gap, the main objective of our study was to document the experience of parents returning to work following perinatal loss. To do so, we conduct 2 studies where participants had to answer online questionnaires. Initially, we attempt to recruit all parents, but so few fathers answer our questionnaires that we were unable to adequately represent their reality And we had to make the decision to only focus on mother's experience for now. We have other qualitative study involving fathers, but maybe that will be for another presentation. So for today, we're going to only talk about the experience of mothers who were 18 and older, living in the province of Quebec in Canada. And there's a slight difference between study 1 and study 2. So in study 1, participants had to have experienced a perinatal loss within the last 12 months. But they also had to have been back at work for at least 2 weeks. In study 2, participants had to have experienced a perinatal loss at any point in their life, but they also had to have returned to work following their loss. Recruitment for study 1 started in 2021, and for study 2, we started a little bit later on, more in 2022. We measure various aspects of mother's experience in returning to work, but the one we will discuss today are the type and duration of leave granted after the loss, as well as the accommodation offered upon returning to work, such as the possibility of making changes to one's task or schedule. We also measure disclosure of the loss. So if the loss was disclosed in the workplace, yes or no, but also the reasons associated with the choice to disclose or not disclose their loss. Of course, we measure perinatal grief symptoms with the perinatal grief scale. We also measure motivations for returning to work with subscale ranging from very intrinsic motivations which reflect the enjoyment of doing one's work or a free choice to go back to work, to more extrinsic motivation, more related to external factors like, for example, financial pressure. We also measure psychological well-being and distress at work with questions like, these days at my job, I feel energetic, appreciated by others, I have goals, or I lack energy, I am in conflict with others, or I feel undervalued. Finally, we measure work functioning with the lab employment absence and productivity scales, which contains 2 subscales. One measuring troublesome symptoms at work, like low energy, poor concentrations, and the other measuring impaired productivity, like getting less work done or making more mistakes. The sociodemographic profile of our participants in study 1 and study 2 were broadly comparable. So the mean age was 31 years old in study 1 and 36 years old in study 2. Also, most participants self-identify as white Caucasians and were married or common law partner. A majority report a household income of $70,000 or higher, which is slightly below the median household income in Canada. And more than half are had undergraduate or graduate level education. In terms of employment, participants in both studies report working on average 36 hours per week, which corresponds to mostly to full-time jobs. And a notable proportions of participants work in the health and social services sector. Regarding the type of life experience, the first chart shows that in study 1, so the yellow bars, over half of the losses occur before the 12th week of pregnancy, so quite early in the pregnancy. In study 2, so the blue bars, we had fewer early loss, but we had more losses between 20 to 29 weeks of pregnancy and later on, so later in the pregnancy. So this is an important difference between study 1 and study 2. We need to keep in mind just when we're going to interpret the results. The second chart presents the time since the loss. So in study 1, we have participants had to have a loss in the last years. So, but most participants had their loss between 3 to 6, 9, or 12 months. So it was quite recent. But in study 2, we include a much broader range of participants with many losses that dated back so far as 1980 to 2015, but also more recent losses dating from 2019 to 2021. So the results. Let's first look at the type of leave that bereaved mothers had access to. In study one, a little over 1/4 of participants, so 27.2% of mother had they took maternity leave that are in Quebec provided by the government, and 45% relied on sick leave that are usually related to their workplace benefits plan. In study two, the pattern is almost reversed. So more than half of mothers took maternity leave, while about 30% took sick leave after their loss. The durations of maternity leave was, of course, longer than that of sick leave. So these results are consistent with our sample profile, like presented in the last slide. So in the sense that in the province of Quebec, Canada, where the study took place, when the loss occurred after the 19th week of pregnancy, maternity leave of 18 weeks are granted by the government. Whereas if it happens earlier, it's like most of our participants in study ones, parents tend to use sick leave, unpaid leave, or simply no leave at all because they can't have the maternity leave because the loss happened too earlier for to be eligible. In line with this context, we also found that in both studies, sick leave or unpaid leave were significantly more common for mothers who had experienced a loss before the 20th week of pregnancy. And a mother who had experienced early loss at before the 12th week of pregnancy were more likely to have had no leave at all. We noticed that in both studies, nearly 20%, so 1 in 5%, did not add any leave at all. We also observed links or correlations between the type of leave obtained and well-being and psychological distress at work. That was very interesting. So we found that in study one, women who did not benefit from any leave at all scored lower on our well-being at work measure. In study two, maternity leave was associated with higher well-being at work upon return, whereas sick leave was linked to lower well-being at work, and not being able to get any leave at all was associated with higher psychological distress at work. In addition to leave, some mothers benefit from accommodations when they return to work. The possibility to make changes in their work schedule was the most common, obtained by 60 to 44% of women. Possibility to make change in tasks were slightly less frequent, while teleworking was much more frequent in study one than in study two, which could be explained by the fact that the participants in study two had experienced their loss mostly before the pandemic and the widespread adoptions of teleworking. It is important to note that there were considerable variability in the accommodations provided, with some mothers having the opportunity to benefit from several of them. For example, approximately 15 to 24% of mothers obtained all three accommodations. However, on the other hand, there were also between 27 and 49% in study two who did not benefit from any of these three accommodations. As with leave, we also noticed associations between accommodations and well-being and distress at work, with the two first accommodations being associated with higher well-being and lower psychological distress upon returning to work. Associations with teleworking were mixed, so it's hard for not to to draw a solid conclusion on this topic for now. Need more research. Now, motivation for returning to work. So we found that the reasons motivating bereaved mother to return to their work were varied, but some stands out as more common and are the ones that are highlighted in yellow. In both studies, a large proportions of mothers report returning to work for intrinsic reasons, because their work is interesting, because their work is fun, and because their work is exciting. Some mothers also indicate that they return to work because they find that it's important for them to work. However, more than half of mothers also indicate that they return to work for more extrinsic reasons, namely financial pressure. And this type of motivation is important to consider because it was associated in our data with less well-being at work and more psychological distress at work. It was also associated with more impaired work functioning or more difficulties in work functioning upon returning to work. Regarding perinatal grief symptoms, the mean score for participant in study 1 was 52.73, which is slightly above the high score threshold for this type of measure, that is 52.39. We can see that grief symptoms seems to increase gradually according to the numbers of weeks of pregnancy at which the loss occurred. So starting at like 50.57 and going to 57.69 for loss occurring from the 30 weeks of pregnancy and later on. However, our statistical analysis indicate that these differences are not significant. So that's the result you see here in the right-handed column. So we would like to have a statistic that is less than 0.05, and now we have 0.089. So that's not significant statistically, which means that the difference are probably too small to be considered really different, even if we can see a little pattern here. Similarly, grief symptoms did not vary according to the time since the loss, with mother who had experienced the loss more recently, like in the last months or the last 3 months, having similar average scores of perinatal grief symptom than those who had experienced the loss a little longer ago, like 6 to 9 months ago or 9 to 12 months ago. Therefore, average grief symptoms were quite high and remained fairly constant during the 12 months of study 1. They were just likely to be present when mothers returned to work, even if they had the maternity leave of 18 weeks. And not surprisingly, we also found in our data that grief symptoms were associated with less well-being at work, more psychological distress at work, and more impaired work functioning, so more difficulties in work functioning, particularly in terms of lack of energy or motivation at work, poor concentrations or memory, and anxiety or irritability at work. So there were some associations with productivity loss, but those were weaker. So the most associations we found with work functioning were related to the troublesome symptoms subscale, like the example that are indicated here in the slide. In study 2, current perinatal grief symptom scores that were reported by mother often several years after the loss, because we measure the actual grief symptoms, even if the loss occurred like sometimes 10, 15, or 20 years ago. So it was not surprising to see that the score were lower, below the high score threshold, but symptoms are still present for some mothers. We also know that current perinatal grief symptoms were significantly higher. So here we had a significant result that symptoms were higher for mothers who had experienced a late loss, so at 30 weeks of pregnancy or beyond, compared with those who had a loss before the 12 weeks of pregnancy. Finally, last result that I want to present to you. So these grief symptoms experienced by mothers led many of them to disclose their loss in their workplace despite the taboos. Indeed, that was more surprising for us, maybe because vast majority of mothers disclosed their loss in their workplace in both studies. So the main reason for disclosing was to explain sometimes symptoms and behaviors related to the grief, to relieve the stress of keeping a secret, or to improve their psychological well-being. So what do all these results tell us? Just some points I'd like to highlight there. First, there were a lot of variability in the type and durations of leave granted to mothers. As mentioned earlier, this could be explained by the fact that in Quebec, where the studies took place, when the loss occurs after the 19th week of pregnancy, the birthing parent is eligible to 18 weeks of maternity leave. In all other cases, mothers had to resort to sick leave, unpaid leave, or no leave at all, which were associated in our study with less well-being, more distress at work. On the contrary, maternity leave was linked to greater well-being at work upon return. We also noticed a lot of variability in the accommodations offered upon returning to work, with some women appearing to be more fortunate than others and benefiting from a greater number of them. Motivations for returning to work also varied greatly. For some, it was out of love for their job, and that type of motivation was associated with several positive consequences in terms of psychological health and performance at work. On the other hand, extrinsic motivations related to financial pressure were also quite prevalent in our sample, like about one in two person about. So this is quite concerning because this type of motivations was associated with more negative outcomes. As for grief symptoms, they remain high during the 12 months of study one. At that time, most mothers are usually back at work while still grieving, particularly in the case of early losses, where their return to work sometimes often happens sooner. Also importantly, there was no significant difference in the intensity of grief symptoms depending on when the loss occurred during the pregnancy. So this debunks the myth that the earlier the loss occurred, the easier it is to recover from. Rather, findings point out to the importance of legitimizing all types of perinatal loss. Finally, the results indicate that grief symptoms were associated with difficulties in work functioning, particularly in terms of troublesome symptoms like lack of motivation and problem with concentration. Problem with productivity, like I said, were also present, but to a more lesser extent, as if mothers were able to compensate their difficulties so that they did not affect the visible aspect of their work performance. However, it's possible that the extra effort required by these mothers to maintain an adequate level of performance, despite the presence of troublesome symptoms, could drain a lot of their energy and possibly further damage their psychological health. And some practical implication, maybe to conclude the presentation. So first, the inequality and variability in the leave and accommodations offered following perinatal loss may result in bereaved parents being confused about what they are entitled to and the steps required to obtain it. And all this at a time that is emotionally demanding. So standardized leaves or accommodation that covers all type of perinatal loss could ensure that bereaved parents don't have to bear the additional burden of various ambiguous administrative procedure to get the time off they need, nor do they have to rely on the luck of belonging to one of the rare organizations that has specific measures in place for perinatal loss. To achieve this, more studies are needed to document the impact of perinatal loss on organization. In recent years, various campaigns have been conducted to raise awareness about mental health at work. We have now fairly accurate numbers on the economic impact of common mental health difficulties, particularly in terms of lost productivity, but these data does not cover perinatal bereavement. We therefore need to build a business case on the economic consequence of perinatal loss in order to capture the attention of employers. It is necessary to educate workplaces about the perinatal bereavement and to debunk myths in highlighting that any type of perinatal loss can lead to grief that is just as significant as any other loss. It is also important for employers to know that in many cases, employees returning to work still experience high levels of grief symptoms, which can have a significant impact on their functioning at work. Finally, we need to equip the various stakeholders in the workplace who are in contact with bereaved parents, like colleagues and managers. The result of our other study indicate that these individuals usually wants to be supportive, but due to lack of knowledge or comfort with perinatal loss, they sometimes engage in maladaptive behaviors that may, for example, minimize the lost experience. Very practical advice could therefore help these individuals to become better source of support. And finally, with all this in mind, I would like to conclude this presentation with a hope that the workplace will become a place of comfort and healing for parents who experience perinatal loss. We know that it is possible because we have met parents in our study for whom this was already the case, but we now need to see if we can generalize this positive experience to every parent. So that's it for the presentation part. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I haven't knocked you out with all these data and results, but I think it's important to document the experience of returning to work in order to raise awareness among employers and also to identify relevant recommendations for them. I think I don't know if it's possible, but I would like it's okay for me if we can share the presentations to participants today. And I've put some resource here. You can click on the link. It's some infography. I don't even know if that you can say that in English, but it's like little visual tool that
Infographics. Yeah.
infographics. Oh, perfect. That we did with the team I'm working with Francine. And I also let a link that a new study that is also directed by Francine de Montigny, my colleague, about training needs and of healthcare and social services professional and student who supports parent experience of perinatal loss. So if you're curious, you can just click on the link and go see what this study is all about.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Wonderful. You've got, yes, we'd be very happy to share the presentation, and and also the recording will be put up on our YouTube channel if everyone's happy with that. So if you don't mind having your face on YouTube,
It's
you're very
okay.
welcome to, you're very welcome to put on your cameras, everyone, and or whoever would like to. And we're going to open the floor to discussion. So, um, yeah, it's okay, Amanda. Everyone's welcome to keep their camera on anytime. And you've been on many ISI Presents, so I'm assuming you don't mind. So, so please, we usually have a very informal discussion afterwards. So please feel free to just unmute yourself and ask any questions you want to Sophie. My first question is, who wants to move to Canada? It's quite generous. The maternity leave from
Yes.
relatively early, but I mean, compared to many countries. So, yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
Well,
Yeah.
the the case with it where we're working on harder, it's for the early losses that happens like before the 20th weeks in pregnancy. And we're also working hard on that. I don't have unfortunately I don't have many data on fathers, and that's hard because fathers don't have anything at any
That's
moment of the
right.
loss, or even if the loss happens at birth, or if the child is not alive, they cannot have what the government give. So the paternity leave that exists if the child is alive, but it's not possible
Not if your child
if
dies.
there's a
Yeah,
loss. So they go
yeah,
back to work like the day after, or they had to do health services are not that efficient in Canada. I don't know where it is, but sometimes it's hard to, it's possible, but it's hard to have an appointment with the physicians to have a sick leave that you need to have the paper so you can get paid by your employers. It's a lot of administrative procedures, and it's kind of heavy for them to do this in a period
yeah.
of grief. So yeah,
And I'm sure
can be
that's a
repetitive.
very common experience in many countries. So I'd love to open it up. Does anyone have any comments? I know we've got a few Canadians on the call. Amanda, please go ahead.
I had to I had to jump right in because I'm very curious to know how if you've had sort of response from people who work in human resources for companies about what they feel about this research or what their expectations were.
Yes. Yes, that was our research really resonate for many people. Like just from the first day we launched the research, I arrived at work and some colleague told me, "Oh my God, I didn't know you was working on these topics. It happened to me, and the return to work was so chaotic." And so there was a lot of I think people view this topic very useful. They very see the relevance of it. And yeah, I think HR people also, they just sometimes they just don't know how to, or they don't feel comfortable with this subject, or they don't want to overstep on the personal side of the employee. So it really depends. Some people, a lot of people that have been through it, so they understand. But if they haven't, sometimes it's harder to um, so they don't minimize this type of loss compared to other type of loss in life. So yeah, that's not very current answer, sorry, but just you can add other question if that doesn't answer completely. But yeah, that was a very positive
Yeah,
response. I think people are open to um to incorporate other measure, but it's for more with HR people, it can vary from one organization to another. So some organizations have in their collective agreement, they have some measure for perinatal loss, but that's very rare. And that's what makes the big variability. Workers we met, sometimes they say they rely on luck. So we want them to rely on more than luck. But especially fathers, they say, oh, me, I'm lucky because my manager is very open-minded, and we just took some unofficial agreement between each other, and I had some time off. But if I were in another organization, I may not have. So that's why we would like to have measures that are more like by the government, or that are more for everyone, and not just some specific organization.
Amanda, any follow-up thoughts on that? Your
Well,
experience?
it is interesting because my first experience was as a manager, and I had an employee who came to me, and the human resources department was right away saying, "Call her back, find out if she wants to take bereavement leave or if she wants to take sick leave." And I was like, "I don't think she cares. Just make sure she gets paid." Like I'm not calling her back right away after this horrible thing to find out some administrative detail, right? So that's certainly something I think we all have to communicate very well with human resources about why this is important and why it doesn't have to be difficult for the person experiencing it. We want to make it as smooth as we can, right? So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, what we heard from parents was that the administrative route were complicated, so they didn't know which case to check, which forms they had to complete, where and in where does it fall in the form, and even with physicians when they visit the clinics and they say, oh, what do I write as a reason? So they say like they write like some things like we have a in Quebec, there's something that's called adaptation problem. So they say you have an adaptation problem. I don't have an adaptation problem. I mean, I have grief, I have a bereavement. So that's another experience. That's not.
We shouldn't need any special explanation for grief, right?
Yeah. And what we see is that we have, for now, we have leave that consider the physical aspect of the loss. So that's why they are only provided for mothers, because sometimes when the loss occurs later, there's the birthing, there's physical consequences on the mother. So the leave is granted to help the mother recover from the physical consequences of the loss. So we completely don't look at the psychological consequences as if they're not as important. So that's why, but it's like it's mental health, and we did a lot of progress in the recent years about stopping the stigma, or about mental health. But there's still a lot of work, right?
Yes.
in that immediate
Stigmatizing.
aftermath, with the fog of making decisions, forcing someone to make a decision is really
Yeah.
challenging. You don't want to have to take up additional brain space doing the thinking on this kind of thing. You've got enough on your plate that whatever we can do to
Yeah.
smooth the waters, I think makes a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much, Sophie.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Amanda.
Thanks to you.
Great question. Teresa, please, you've got your hand up.
Hi, Sophie, let me do my camera here. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was really very interesting, and we need more and more of that kind of research to be done. So I really commend you. One question I have is also the support that's needed for moms who choose to donate their milk to breast milk banks. So do you know if you touched on that, or if there's any work along that lines? Thank you.
That's very interesting, because I think that's the blind spot we have on our research, because we didn't heard about it. And even if we hadn't add anything in our questionnaire about this topic, so maybe for next research, some things to have in mind. And even in the interviews, because we met like about I think 25, 30 mothers in interview, and that's not something we talk about with them. So thank you for that. That's a very interesting thought to, yeah, maybe you're back at work, but you have to have maybe some accommodations or something to help you pursue this if you want to go that way. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thought, isn't it? Great. Manu, please.
Hey, hi. Really fascinating studies. I was wondering if you know if there's any research done on the bereaved moms who never go back to work.
Mm. Oh, that sounds like, oh my God, you have so many research projects I need to pursue because, yeah, we had that was one of our criteria because we wanted to study the return how
Yeah.
does it goes when they're back at work. So that was on one of our inclusion criteria. So I didn't have, but we looked if there's some change in employment. So did they
Uh,
change jobs, or did they change the domain, or they were working on? So there, so we can see. But it was not a lot of person, but some person changed to work in to find another job that was making more sense for them in their life, or the priority that work was taken in their life just shift for other priority regarding their personal life or so we could like measure a little bit of that, but mother never returned to work. I'm not sure if we had cases in our city with our
okay.
inclusion criteria, but that
Yes.
there.
But I mean, I have no idea about the numbers, but in my experience, I've heard of many people who've, like you said, actually either took a completely different turn in their life or went
Mhm.
into, I would say, non-paying kind of jobs like advocacy, or some
Yeah.
people were never able to return to their initial job, not because they like literally like decided that they were not more interested, but because of sometimes the nature of the job. That's the case for me. For
Yeah.
example, I was an OB, and honestly, I was never in a place where I felt like it was even possible.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious to know because I think obviously like this is super important, and eventually I returned to a different job too. Um,
Mhm.
but I think if we could also measure how many people don't return to job because they don't feel that the support would be there, or that um
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how to explain that, but like you cannot go back to work, or the work
Mhm.
you had is just
Yeah.
you can't do it anymore. And I think
Mhm.
this would be also really important in measuring the impact on what it does, to women's, again, employment and financial situation and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was also very varied the support mothers had when they returned to work. Like I
Mhm.
said at the end of my presentations, yeah, we had some case where they had great manager, great colleagues, a work they love, because many of our participants were like educated, so graduate or undergraduate, with professional jobs that usually in social services and health and education and more in those sectors. So people that are usually get a vocation for their job, usually they love their job. So that's more interesting maybe to go back to your job if you have this environment and you're really supported by your colleague, by your manager. So, but other person didn't had this type of environment also. So that was very varied. And some mothers they told us they want this support, and other mothers they didn't necessarily wanted to talk about their loss at work. They wanted to be recognized, but not necessarily to talk about it in depth or to. So what we recommend is to ask the mother what she needs, because needs are very variable depending on the person. So maybe sometimes people say, I don't know what to say to her. I don't know what to do. Well, ask her. It's that simple as that. Ask her what she needs. Ask her what you could do to help her. And the better way to make sure to have a support that is appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Cobran is going to have some great experience from Iceland.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you
Hi.
for the presentation. I contacted you earlier because I'm also doing a research here in Iceland.
Yeah.
Yes. And I thought it interesting when you were talking about the HR management because my research is about I'm doing interviews with the HR management just to check because here in Iceland we have a grief leave and it is put into law, so you have to grant the parents the right to stay at home after a loss. And I am checking with the HR management, and here in Iceland, there is a great, support from the companies. And I'm also I'm talking about, I'm sorry, I'm not great in English, not just speaking it like low fluently, but
Me neither. Okay.
But we can see here that because it was always a sick leave before, but the HR management here are so relieved that now it's just in the law that you have to make people take it, or if they want to, they don't have to, but they can. And yeah, so we found it here that it is just so important. So people then don't have to rely on the HR management to be like good persons or whatever. So yeah. But in Iceland, it's both for the fathers and the mothers. So
Wow.
yeah.
Great. And how long do they have? How many days or weeks are granted with this grief
From
leave?
18, if the parents experience loss in 18 to 22 weeks, it's 3 months. But from 18 weeks to 18 years old children, that is 6 months.
Okay, perfect. And are there leave for like early loss that happens like earlier in the pregnancy, so before the 20th week of pregnancy? Is the
No,
leave granted for that? No.
before 18 weeks, I work for an organization, and we are trying to get it down to 12 weeks. But
yeah.
we're having succeed, but we have just now in June, we were able to make it longer. So that just happened now, 1st of September. So yeah, we are always trying to get it more down, but then it's just sick leave before that time. So
Yeah,
yeah.
we're working on the same page because we're in contact with government agency in Canada or in the province of Quebec, and they want data, so we need to publish our data so they can be more official. But yeah, we're trying to extend the leave, the grief leave to fathers, but also to early losses, like before the 20th week of pregnancy. And they ask us, okay, so how many days or weeks should we give to mothers and father? And it's hard to it's hard to pinpoint an exact numbers of days a week, but of course we need to be realistic because money is always unfortunately not eternal. So but mothers in our interview, some of them told us just 1 or 2 days would be appreciated because it would be like a recognition that something happened, that did exist, that it's not another like adaptation trouble, like I said earlier, so just having a first step of just having maybe a couple of days for early loss would be a huge steps for us also in Canada. So we're working on that, but for like still a couple of years already. And yeah, we're still hoping that one day we're gonna have the results we would like to have. Yeah. But it's political also, so that's complicated.
Absolutely, yeah, no, unfortunately we don't
Thank
have
you.
endless resources, but seems like, I think you mentioned also in your final points about the economic impact, but of course, and some companies think, well, this is costing me too much money, but when you think of what you actually save, if that woman leaves the workplace or has
Yep.
extended sick leave, or or is entirely miserable in her workplace, and not functioning properly, that's a massive loss to the economy, which companies, don't always take into consideration. So it's really, what are the benefits of this, and showing that in an economic way that you can make that money argument that actually you're going to
Yes.
save money in the long run doing this. I think that's a really important argument. We try it all the time in prevention, but it's
Yeah.
not, it's a hard one to get across sometimes. I just
Yeah.
want to see in the chat, Renato, I don't know, you've got a couple of questions. I don't know if you want to unmute and speak. Would you like to do that, or I can
Hi,
read out your
everyone.
question? Yeah,
Thank you for the
hi, go ahead.
opportunity. So great presentation. Thank you, Sophie, for that. I
Thank
was
you.
just I was just curious about some points that maybe would be a little bit different from our context.
Yeah.
We here in Brazil, we are trying to understand the role of the partner in this kind of endeavor challenge of, it's affects all the family, and also we have
Yeah.
the issue on the partnership of motherhood, and almost 30% of the women, they are solo mothers, which is also a challenge for the Brazilian pregnant woman and those who has experienced the pregnancy loss. And the grief process, it's a little bit different from our perspective in those cases. Mainly because in this case they are responsible for the house income, right? So I would like to hear a little bit more from your perspective on that. And
Yeah.
also those that are considered early career versus the senior career mothers, if you would expect any difference.
Yeah. Yeah, good questions. Like most of our participants were, like I said, married or in common law partners. So we mostly had they had a partner in most cases. And I don't know what are the statistics in Canada about the solo mother. I'm gonna go Google that just after our meeting because that's interesting. But yeah, there's what we notice in our study, that's it's the case of self-employed mothers or fathers. It was harder for them because they don't have the financial security of their employers. So people that are self-employed are working on, they have their business or working on, so there's more pressure to return to work for financial reason and really early, because if you're not here, the business is not it's not going, it's gonna fail, it's gonna, so that's a type of worker that is particularly at risk of returning earlier to work and of having a lot of stress associated with their return to work. But the more they work for organizations that have security and good conditions, like government organizations or big organizations, usually they're gonna have like a benefits plan in their organization. So yes, it's complicated. They need to see physicians, to have a paper that is signed by a physician to say, okay, he's not feeling well, I confirm. But once they have this, they can be paid, and so the stress diminished at that time. So I would say that people that are self-employed or working for in small organizations that don't have those benefits plans are more at risk of returning to work earlier and having more stress associated with that. It's very interesting to look at how partner react to the grief and how their return to work happen. But a lot of some fathers usually return earlier to work than mothers. And are more in a support role. So they keep working. They keep the financial security. They also support the mother. And what we see with father is sometimes that they're gonna crash later on. So when the mother is going better, when she is back at work, sometimes father just experience high level of distress because they just wait. I don't know how that is managed, but a couple of months later, they're gonna have some more symptoms and more difficulties. And what could I add about this? Yes, I think that's what comes into mind for now. But I'll keep that in
We've
thought.
had
I don't know if you have another. Yeah.
we've had some previous ISA present sessions about men and how they cope and you know how unrecognized it is and unacknowledged, and they bottle a lot in. And so there were
Yeah.
some lovely presentations in our Colombo conference last year. We had a couple of men there who were had set up clubs to support men, and they were often, you know, sports clubs, and somewhere where men would feel comfortable, and then they could open up and talk with other men who'd experienced loss as well. So it's a
Yeah.
really
And
important area.
I
Yeah.
found, I think, what I was going to say, because
I reminded you.
we didn't. Yeah, we didn't. We have difficulties recruiting fathers, like I said in the beginning. That was a deception, because we tried, but mothers participate. Fathers, it was harder to reach them. But we had some interviews, so we have a lesser. You know, I don't have a big sample, but we have interviews with them, and some said that they were happy to return to work, because that was a relief for them. When they were at work, they weren't thinking about the loss, and sometimes when they were back at home, their partner was grieving, and there was more like, and I'm just taking the words of one participant, they had like a funeral ambience at home, so it was a bit hard for them also. So some said it was a good thing for me to go back to work, because it was a time where I could just like really think about something else. Well, anyways, others.
Yeah, there's many
But there's other experience where men
of course.
said, I would have liked to be there for my partner, because
Yeah,
I know she's
yeah,
at home. I know she's mourning, so I would like to be there, and I can't because I
yeah,
need to work.
support her.
So we had both experience also in that case.
Yeah, and I think all those experiences, there's a whole spectrum, isn't there, of how
Mhm.
people deal with grief, you know. So Tavinda, please.
Hi, Tabinda.
Hi, thank you so much, dear Sophie, for a wonderful presentation. And
Welcome.
it's really very meaningful topic you have selected for the women. And I'm from Pakistan, and in our organization, and I'm also psychologist. It's interesting. Yes. So yes, and in our country. Uh, just government employees get the 3 months leave from the government, and this is paid leave for the government employees. But most of the women doing the jobs in private sectors, and in our organization we are working on the bricklayer people, and it's daily wages. So the women work with their husbands, and you can't imagine that they work in the last week of their pregnancy, and the ratio of miscarriages in these women are very high, because their work is so hard. So and we have experienced that they work right after their miscarriage and right after their delivery, and it's very difficult for them, and as well as they have not emotional support from their family, and from the society and from the workplace. uh, so we are trying our best to give these women trauma healing counseling, and support them emotionally. So your presentation helped us a lot, and it's very very important for the women, for working women. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that comments, and yeah, it's very interesting to look at in every country how it is on niveau for in society and in the workplace, and it can be there can be common things, but also very different experience. And I think it's quite variable also in India, because you said like government employee they can have a leave, but other employee cannot. So once again, you have to rely on the luck of being part of that type of organization if you want to have a leave. But if you don't, so there's a lot of inequality. So we're trying to have something more universal that could be applied to everyone. Yeah.
challenging in lower
Yeah.
resource settings, isn't it? So yeah. Adolphe, please.
Yes,
Come in.
please.
Adolphe is from Rwanda. Welcome.
Yes, yes. Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. Okay. Very interested topic, and I'm happy to from your side the way you presented this very important topic. I just have small comments and like question. And what I want to know was the effect, psychological effect, which was uh, mentioned on the patient or those who returned early to the work. Have you at least look on the way if that integration from the work, it was based on the prior work environments, or like, I don't know if you are getting me well. Just if those who were feeling better to integrate the work as early as possible, if they had like prior work environment which was
Yeah.
smooth to them, or if that someone who had like a work environment which is not receptive
Hmm.
to her or to him, might even
Yeah,
not will have willing to return back to the work.
of
Uh,
course.
was it
But
any like link? Yes.
yeah, well, correct me if I haven't understood it right. But if I understand what your questions, you want to know, did we measure the previous work experience before the loss, and if that had an impact on the return to work afterwards? All right. Yeah,
Yes, sure. Sure.
we talk about it in the interview. So in the interview, we were talking about at the beginning of the interview, but before the loss, what was your relation with your colleague? What was your relation with
Mm-hmm.
your manager? How did you? How important was your work to you before the loss? So yes, that was an important thing to consider. And of course, it have an impact. If you have good colleagues, if you have a good manager, you have good relationship with them, you have a
Mm-hmm.
work you love. Yes, of course, it's easier to go back. Your motivation is higher to go back also in this workplace. So that's a very important thing to consider also. And on the contrary, if your workplace is there's conflict with colleagues and with your manager, and your workplace is somewhat toxic or not very good, yeah, that can
Mm-hmm.
be like because we cannot separate all the spheres of our life. So when the work sphere doesn't go well, it adds like little blocks of psychological distress one-on-one, and combined with the grief, the stress of the workplace can combine with the stress of going through grief and bereavement, and symptoms can be even higher for those persons that are even more at risk of developing like prolonged grief or psychological distress at work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. We are right at time, and I'm sorry, my internet dropped for a second there, so I missed your last response, but we have the recording, so I hope it's all going to work fine. Sophie, alas, thank you so much to you. Super interesting conversation. Interesting research, obviously. Everyone thought so. It's was really great to hear about your work, and good luck with your ongoing advocacy in Canada. And we definitely hope that others will be able to, pick up from what you're doing and build on that and advocate in their own settings for at least some improvement in the situation of the workplace for both mothers and fathers who've experienced a parental loss. So once again, so we thank you so much. We really appreciate it. It was lovely to have you. And oh, you'll hear, Irene, you'll hear the recording. It'll be up on YouTube, and we'll send out the presentation. So Judith will be doing that in the next couple of days. So thank you everyone for joining. Thanks for all your comments and questions. Great discussion. And we look forward to the next one in 2 months' time. So stay tuned. Thanks again, Sophia.
Thank you very much.
Good luck. Okay, bye everyone.